And for me, this has been a wonderful opportunity to return to something that I love, which is painting, to show this project, which I think deserves some focus, and to really showcase Tim Dlugos, who is one of our amazing poets of that generation, of the New York School, who was lost at 40 years old, did not have the opportunity to really accomplish what he could have accomplished in his career. And if in any way I brought a new generation to see Tim's work through my work, that gives me such a wonderful feeling. So I'm very grateful to be able to do that. Tim Dlugos and I met in 1980, and right after meeting him, I heard him read his poem, Gilligan's Island, and it had a huge impact on me. It combined so many of the elements of my youth. In 1983, Tim was commissioned by Bob Littman, then the curator of the Gray Gallery at NYU, to do an installation in the Gray Gallery windows on Washington Square. Tim turned to me and asked me to do the visualization of this installation. I was the art director at Fiorucci, and Fiorucci was basically a disco with clothes. It was a nexus for art, culture, youth. It was the first lifestyle boutique, and it defined a generation. It made sense for Tim to turn to me to do the show, to do the visualization, because Fiorucci was known for elevating kitsch to the sublime. And that's what he had done with his poem. He had created, from this kitschy Hollywood television show ethos, this sublime story, this sublime piece. And we were so well suited to work together on it. My background was painting, and I had completed my Master of Fine Arts at Pratt Institute in 1979 and had stopped painting, essentially. Although Tim always did encourage me to go back to it. He actually owned one of my paintings, and I think that when he asked me to do this collaboration with him, he had in mind that I would begin to paint again. I don't think that Bob Littman at Gray Gallery really knew what he was getting himself into when he assigned this project to Tim. I don't think he was aware of the stanza in the poem that deals with masturbation. And I believe that in the end, Bob was nervous about putting something up in the Gray and in the windows on Washington Square that would deal with such a French subject. And as a result, the show never happened. My career took me elsewhere outside of New York. Tim's path took him to divinity school at Yale, to study spirituality, and finally, following his AIDS diagnosis, to write some of the most beautiful poetry, the clearest vision that he had in his career. Some of his best poems were written in those final months of his life. And then he died in 1990. It was really just a trauma upon trauma upon trauma. And so I carried this thought with me for many years that perhaps someday I would be able to bring this project to fruition. I spend time on Fire Island during the summer. And in the summer of 2007, I had started to paint again, and I was searching around for what to paint. And I had been challenged by Peter McGough of McDermott and McGough, a good friend of mine, to come up with some subject matter that was personal, that but would employ the subject matter that interested me, which is the period of the 1960s, which is talking about myself, and that had that kind of color and glamour, something that I really loved in my career and I still love. And it dawned on me one morning, I was sitting on the beach and I realized that I was on Gilligan's Island, and that this was this was what I should do, is I should bring Tim and my project back to life and complete it. But I wanted to create something that did not illustrate the poem, but rather interpreted the poem. And so what I did is I acted almost like a child would do if they were illustrating something or creating a piece of artwork about something. And I just cut and pasted all these images together. Some of them are the real photographic image from the television show Gilligan's Island. Some are lifted from news coverage of the era. Some are paintings, some are drawings, but they're all layered together to create a storyline that really is about the emotional meaning of the poem and how I relate to it. The first step along the path of creating this into a real exhibition was that I contacted David Trinidad. And David Trinidad is Tim's poetry editor. And I told him what I was doing. And so he came to the studio, this studio, and saw the work and became really engaged around it and encouraged me and gave me actually the permission to use the poem, which I was anxious about, and gave me the impetus to continue going. Tim's papers are part of such an important archive that Marvin Taylor has assembled. And I was fortunate enough to be introduced to Marvin through David Trinidad, and I told him what we were doing, and of course he remembered that in the archives at the Fales is all of Tim's correspondence about this show and how it didn't come to fruition. So he of course knew what the story of this, and he recognized its significance, and he gave me the encouragement to complete the work, and he put me on the calendar at the Fales. This is such an important and personal statement on my part, because in a way it brings up a lot of things from my childhood, the 1960s, watching the Gilligan's Island as a kid, my personal feelings about Ginger and the Professor, my feelings about the JFK assassination, it having taken place in Dallas as I grew up in Houston. It was a big deal to the whole country, but to a 9-year-old, it's really was my first experience with death. And the grieving process of the nation and what we all went through collectively, I internalized very much, and it's very much part of me, that experience that happened in 1963. So all the references in the poem were very personal for me, and I was anxious to explore them visually. These are the watercolor studies that I did to start the project. I did these out on Fire Island, and they're small works. They're not really completed. They're more like drawings with washes on them. But in them, I began to explore the different nuances of the story, whether it was the title slide that I just showed you, or Kennedy riding in the limousine with the Gilligan's Island over it. Here you see our hero who's fantasizing and what he's thinking about as he, this is actually the moment in the show that the title comes from. At moments like these, he feels farthest away. But what he's thinking about is the professor. Jackie Kennedy, Tippi Hedren, and Ginger are all three icons of 1960s beauty and glamour. And here we see Jackie with her pink pillbox hat and her Chanel suit in Dallas the morning of the assassination. But who can look at this image without feeling a sense of doom about it? Because we all know what's going to happen. Lee Harvey Oswald and Gilligan actually have a lot in common. Gilligan is the person who ruins the castaways' chances of getting off the island every week, and Lee Harvey Oswald is the person who brings down Camelot. And here I show them side by side with their gear. Gilligan with his binoculars and his nautical equipment, and Lee Harvey Oswald with his rifle. And I use the line from the poem, "He squeezes the trigger." The title slides from Gilligan's Island showing Jim Backus with a scene from Nagasaki behind, which is a reference to a line in the poem that the moment reminds the narrator of the stillness in a Japanese city at the end of the war. The poem itself and the images in the show are so pop and so fun that you're drawn to them. Men were men and women were beautiful, but underneath the surface we know that something isn't as it seems, as we have come to find out as time went by. Camelot was not as innocent as we thought it was, and we find in Tim's poem Gilligan's Island is not as innocent as it looked. Everybody is actually attracted to everybody else, especially the men to the men. And this is where I bring this to fruition in the stanza that Tim talks about, which was the controversial masturbation stanza. Everything is not as it seems, and it is actually a darker story than we thought. And that's Tim exploring the loneliness and the isolation of the young boy coming to terms with his sexuality, but also the loneliness and the isolation we all feel in this world of swirling images, media, all of the Hollywood, the television, the pop kind of emotional lives that we lead. Underneath it is a sadness and a sense that we're kind of alone in this world. I think that at the end of the poem, it starts snowing on Gilligan's Island, which I think is a moment which I think of as kind of a nuclear sort of moment. There's nuclear fallout on the island. And it leaves us wondering, like, where do we really stand in the world? And we wonder, what is our world coming to? What are we going to be like? And all these questions are swirling around us every day. And I think that Tim's poem talks about it, and I really hope that the viewer will see that in the show. I wanted to do a portrait of Tim. This is actually a very charming moment between the two of us. And it's a very close connection between the two of us because at that point we were dating and we had a romantic relationship. And so it was very appropriate that he would be looking on at me like this, and then I would use this image to capture him as the icon for the show. And after the show is over, this painting will live on in the Fales Library as one of their images of poets whose work they have in the collection. And if in any way I brought a new generation to see Tim's work through my work, that gives me such a wonderful feeling. So I'm very grateful to be able to do that.